So we've started going over some of these clobber verses, as they're often called, the verses in the Bible that people often use to say that the GLBT community is living in sin because of being attracted to the same gender. There are many verses that people have used over years and years to say that God does not approve of the GLBT community. God does not approve of two people of the same sex being in love. The next section that we're going to be going over is one that probably is one of the most common sections in Scripture that people use to state that God is against the GLBT community, and that is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Bear with me here because I'm going to read the complete account of it in order for us to be able to get a complete understanding of what's going on before we talk a little bit about what this section in Scripture is saying and how this story does or does not apply to the GLBT community. Starting in Genesis chapter 19, verse 1. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them, and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him, and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of our way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot, and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so that they could not find the door. The two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand in the hands of his wife and of his two daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains, this disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it's small. Let me flee to it is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. He said to them, very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew the cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. Now in this story, there's two angels. It's very important to remember here that the text says that they're angels that go to stay with Lot's family. At this point in the text, God has already decided that he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they're conceited, they're unconcerned, and they're self-centered. Now Lot has been pleading with God to save the cities if just a few righteous people can be found. When the city finds out that Lot's family has guests, the text tells us all the men of the city swarmed the house and demanded that the guests come out so that, as several other translations say, they may know them. Now there's a couple of points of interest here. In Hebrew, which is the original language that the Old Testament was written in, all of the men of the city actually means everyone in the city. Oftentimes in Scripture, man and men are used to mean mankind. So everyone in the city came to Lot's door. At this time in history, when there were foreigners that came to a city, it was really common for the city to band together and try to humiliate them and run them out of the city. And the way this was done was often through gang rape. It's important to understand here that what's going on isn't somebody in love with somebody else of the same gender and wanting to be in a love relationship with them. What's going on here is a group of people wanting to humiliate somebody, wanting to force things on people that they don't even know. That's not a loving act. Later on in Scripture, Ezekiel 49 and 50, chapter 49 tells us, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her sisters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen." Right there we see the reasons God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and it has nothing to do with homosexuality. It has everything in the world to do with the fact of how the city treated people. It also says at the end there, doing detestable things. Now there are some people that get that point out of Ezekiel and say, well, homosexuality is detestable, that's what it's talking about. But when you think about it, remember again that the guests were angels. And isn't raping any visitor, let alone angels, pretty detestable? Now there are a lot of people that join the story of Sodom with another verse to try to condemn homosexuality. They point to Jude 1:7, which says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." Now, people hone in on the phrase strange flesh, and yet again, so many of them try to say, well, yeah, this is talking about homosexuality. Look, a man was trying to have sex with a man, that's strange flesh. Yet again, you've got to read the story carefully, and at the very beginning of the story, like I said, we're told that these visitors were angels. Isn't it strange flesh for a human to be trying to have sex with an angel? So as I've said, this is a section of Scripture that so many use to try to condemn the GLBT community. And yet when we look at it, what relevance does it really have? Are two people of the same gender who happen to be in love with each other raping one another in an act of violence? Is it an act of humiliation? I don't believe so, if two people are in love, which is not what anything in this passage is about. Not to mention the fact, as we've spoken about, the fact that so much of what people use to say it's about homosexuality, when you really look at the story in context, you see is about the fact that this is a story of violence and a story of people attempting to have sexual relations with angels, not human beings. So hopefully this has shed a little bit of light on the fact that we've got scriptures here that people either willfully or unwillfully do not understand and are using as weapons against individuals out of that ignorance. In the next little bit, as I've said, we're going to be going over several other verses in Scripture talking about what they really truly do say, as opposed to what sadly we've been told so many times over the years they say about the GLBT community and how these verses have been used as weapons against us. And we're going to learn about the love that God truly does have for us.